Right now, there are roughly 8 billion of you. 8 billion humans spread across every continent, packed into cities, scattered across deserts, living in places our bodies were never built for. It feels permanent. It feels like we were always going to be here, like the universe was holding a seat for us. It wasn't. There may have been a moment, one bad stretch of a few thousand years, when every single human being alive could have fit inside a single football stadium. Not a country, not a city, a stadium with seats to spare. And if that small, stubborn group hadn't made it through whatever they were facing, there would be no 8 billion, no cities, no you. The whole story of humanity would just stop in the dark with a few thousand cold and hungry people and nobody left to remember them. So today, we're going to find out how close we actually came and whether the disaster we usually blame for it even happened the way you've been told. Because the real answer turns out to be stranger and honestly a lot more flattering to our guy Og than the version in the textbooks. Let's start with the clue that tipped scientists off because it's hiding inside you right now. Humans have shockingly little genetic variety. That sounds abstract, so here's the gut punch version. By some measures, you and a complete stranger on the literal opposite side of the planet, different continent, different everything, are more genetically similar to each other than two chimpanzees living in neighboring patches of the same forest. Two chimps who could throw a stick and hit each other are more different, deep down, than you and someone you will never meet 10,000 miles away. That is genuinely weird. A species spread across the entire planet should be bursting with deep, ancient differences between its most distant groups. We're not. We're all suspiciously intimately alike, the genetic equivalent of one big family that never quite branched out. And in biology, there is one specific, ominous reason a species ends up like that. It's called a bottleneck. Picture all of human genetic variety as a wide river. A bottleneck is the moment that river is forced through a narrow neck, some catastrophe so severe the population crashes down to a tiny number of survivors. Everyone alive afterward descends from that small group, so almost all the variety that existed before just vanishes because the people who carried it died. The survivors squeeze through the gap, the population slowly recovers, and the river widens again, but now it's all flowing from one narrow source. When scientists first measured how little variety we actually have, they ran the clock backwards and got a chilling estimate. At some point, the breeding population of our entire species may have dropped to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. Some put it as low as 1,000 mating pairs. That's the whole future of humanity, standing in a field with no idea whether they're the last chapter or the first. So the obvious question is, what nearly did it? What was big enough, mean enough to take a whole species and very nearly switch it off? And for a long time, science had a prime suspect with a truly spectacular rap sheet: a volcano. About 74,000 years ago, on the island of Sumatra, a mountain called Toba didn't so much erupt as detonate. This was not a normal eruption. It was one of the largest volcanic events in the last couple of million years, the kind of explosion that has never happened in recorded human history, that no person has ever witnessed, that we can only read back out of the rock. It threw out so much material that it buried the entire Indian subcontinent, thousands of miles away, under a blanket of ash. The crater it left behind filled with water and became Lake Toba, still the largest volcanic crater lake on Earth. You could lose a small country inside the scar this thing left. And in 1998, an anthropologist named Stanley Ambrose tied the threads together into a story so clean it took over the textbooks. The eruption, he argued, hurled so much sulfur and ash into the upper atmosphere that it dimmed the sun. Not for a day, for years. A volcanic winter, a global cold snap that, in some climate models, dropped temperatures sharply and dragged on for up to a decade. plants died, the animals that ate the plants died, and the humans who ate both suddenly found themselves in a frozen, starving world that, almost overnight, had stopped feeding them. In that story, this is the neck of the bottleneck. Toba goes off, the sky goes gray, and one by one, human groups flicker out like candles in the draft until only a few thousand are left, clinging on in the one place that stayed survivable, somewhere in equatorial Africa. Picture our guy Og there. It's the middle of the day, and the light is wrong, thin, washed out, a permanent overcast that never breaks. The plants he knows are shriveling, the animals are thinner one season, then simply gone the next. His group is smaller this year than last, and smaller again the year after. He has no idea that on the far side of a planet he'll never see, a mountain he'll never hear of, has quietly rewritten the terms of his entire existence. He just knows it's cold, and it's staying cold, and there are fewer of the people he loves every single year. It is an incredible story, apocalyptic, cinematic, the last candle of humanity guttering in the dark and refusing to go out. For about 20 years, it was the answer, the thing that nearly ended us and, by forcing us through that narrow neck, accidentally forged who we became.
There's just one problem. The more carefully people looked, the less it held together. And this is where it gets good, because the truth is doing something far more impressive than the doom. Start with the volcanic winter itself, since the whole catastrophe runs on it. When scientists went hunting for hard evidence of that years-long deep freeze in East Africa, exactly where our ancestors were supposedly dying off in droves, they couldn't find it. The vegetation in the region barely flinched. Later work suggested the amount of sun-blocking sulfur the original models assumed had been wildly overcooked, overestimated in places by a factor of 10 or even 100. The deep world-killing winter the entire story depends on may have been, at worst, a rough patch. And then there are the people who were actually there, or rather the places they left behind. At a site on the coast of South Africa called Pinnacle Point, you can find the literal ash from Toba in the ground, layered right into the middle of human activity. And the people there did not vanish when it fell. They kept living, kept making tools, kept prying shellfish off the rocks like nothing especially apocalyptic was going on. In India, at a site called Jwalapuram, same story. Toba's ash, with human tool-making carrying on right above it and below it. And in Ethiopia, at a place called Shinfa Metama, you find Toba's fingerprint in the soil, and, in the very same layers, a group of humans doing the most human thing imaginable, adapting. As the land dried out, they didn't lie down and die. They changed how they hunted, leaned on the shrinking seasonal rivers, and rode it out. That's the part the doom version completely misses. When the world handed our ancestors a worst-case scenario, the dirt does not record a mass die-off. It records people figuring it out. Even the rest of the animal kingdom backs this up. One big study went looking through the DNA of dozens of mammal species from every continent for the population crash you'd expect if Toba had truly frozen the planet, and almost none of them show it. Toba was a monster, no question, but a species-ending planet killer? The evidence says no. So now we've got a real mystery on our hands, and it's a much better one. The low genetic diversity is real. We genuinely are one strangely close-knit family, which means a squeeze of some kind almost certainly did happen. But the volcano we always pinned it on has a solid alibi. So what actually pinched us down? And the honest, slightly unsatisfying answer is, we're not sure. Some of the genetic signals point to a bottleneck much earlier than Toba, possibly during one of the brutal ice ages well over 100,000 years ago, when Africa itself dried out and human numbers may have crept downward slowly over thousands of years, no single villain required. Others suspect part of the bottleneck might not even be one crash at all, but a trick of the data, the pattern you get when a species lives as scattered little groups that drift apart and fold back together over and over for ages. In other words, the thing that nearly ended us might not have been one bad night with a volcano. It might have been a long, grinding, deeply unglamorous stretch of simply being a small, fragile species in a hard world for a very long time. Less a single apocalypse, more a slow, stubborn refusal to quit. And honestly, that might be the more important version of the story anyway, because here's what does not change, no matter how the debate finally settles. For a long, long time, there were very few of us, not because we were special and protected, but because being human was relentlessly precarious. A small population, spread thin, always one bad century away from gone. And we made it through. Not by getting lucky once, but by being the kind of animal that adapts when the river dries, that moves when the cold comes, that invents a new way to eat the day the old way disappears. The reason there are 8 billion of you is not that the universe held a seat. It's that a few thousand impossibly stubborn people, in the dark, in the cold, in the lean years, simply refused to stop. You are descended from the ones who made it through the neck. Every single human alive is, which means the next time you're standing in a crowd, a packed train, a stadium, a city street, and you feel like one anonymous face in a sea of strangers, here is something that is literally, genetically true. You are not surrounded by strangers, you're surrounded by relatives. Distant ones, sure, but all of us, every last one, came squeezing through the same narrow gap, all descended from the same tiny band of survivors who had every reason in the world to die and didn't. So here's my question, and be honest with yourself. If you got dropped into Og's world, a few thousand humans, a cooling planet, the old food disappearing, do you think you'd be one of the ones who adapted and made it through, or one of the candles that quietly went out? Tell me down in the comments. I have my suspicions about all of us. See you in the next life.